Behind every successful BattleMech campaign, there's a smug fire support officer. Okay, maybe not literally, but you know where I'm going. While BattleTech requires a pretty considerable suspension of disbelief across many aspects of the universe, the benefit of intense fire support is not one of them. Be it from artillery pieces, battlemechs, or orbital bombardment, the forces which wielded the firepower tended to take the field, or at the very least made sure the enemy couldn't take it. So while battlemechs like the Archer and vehicles like the Long Tom steal the limelight, it's important to know that there are other workhorse pieces of technology that have been an ever-present sight on the battlefields of the Inner Sphere and Periphery. One of those is the 85-ton Longbow, which really should have been included in the original 3025 technical readout, but instead made a splash in a newer variant in the 3058 technical readout, along with gems like my baby the Ebon Jaguar. But I digress. No matter where you are in the timeline when you had your first experience with the Longbow, it tends to leave an impression. Though it may not be as immediately recognizable as the Archer, the Longbow has a committed fan base that will sing its praises non-stop, whether you want them to or not. Today I want to sort out why that might be, and hopefully offer you some intel on this 85-ton monster that will motivate you to try it out in your next game. Let's find out why we love the Longbow. The Longbows Andy Redburn commanded were vaguely humanoid in shape, at least from feet to shoulders and head. But at the arm the resemblance ended. Instead of having fully articulated arms, as did so many other mechs, the Longbows sported only massive cylindrical pods intended to launch LRMs. And the Rakshasas, with their forward-thrust torsos and bird legs, looked nothing like the Longbows except that on their shoulder rested boxy LRM launchers. And they carried large lasers just like the one built into the Longbow's chest. The missile barrage arrived in waves that washed over the Cauldronborn. The clan mech jerked up and down with each battering spread of missiles. The green beams of the large lasers slashed through the dust and smoke, evaporating armor and starting in on the myomers of the clan mech's left leg and arm. As the clouds surrounding it cleared, the only pristine armor it still had covered its chest. Its arms had been stripped bare, along with the left leg. Prince of Havoc, page 71, by Michael A. Stackpole. The last half of the 25th century was a wild time for BattleMech development. When the Mackie was first introduced in 2439 and was able to demonstrate its ability to crush conventional armored forces as if they were children's toys, the race was on. Designs like the Banshee, Oregon, and Kyoto pushed the technology forward, and as fans of history know, it was just a matter of time before every major power got their hands on the latest and greatest BattleMech designs. In the latter half of the century, it became more and more obvious that the frontline BattleMech would benefit from more differentiated designs with more specific mission profiles. The Commando was introduced in 2463, the Wasp a year later, filling the role of the swift scout and slayer of infantry. On the other side of the front lines, the Archer, which was introduced in 2458, quickly demonstrated the value of cramming a BattleMech full of long-range missiles that could quickly provide on-the-fly fire support in a tough fight. The Archer was so effective at its job, even in its primitive form, that others took notice. More specifically, Dante Alighieri Mykonos was a supervising engineer at Lockenberg Hawley Industries on Emrys 4. Dante's design team was tasked with creating a BattleMech that could out-Archer the Archer. The Free Worlds League had rapidly industrialized to develop a homegrown BattleMech capability, and while they had filled their units with doppelgangers of the Banshee, Mackie, and other designs, they were lacking a strong fire support BattleMech. Instead of just copying the Archer, the design team decided to see if they could do even better. The LGB-0C Longbow was quickly pushed up from a heavy to an assault class to bulk up everything from its inspiration. At 85 tons, the mech might sacrifice speed, but hopefully would make up for it with significantly more firepower. The first production runs of the Longbow included a standard structure, a 310 primitive fusion engine, 15 single heat sinks, and 13.5 tons of primitive armor, which provided 144 points of protection. Departing from the Archer template, the Longbow's two primary weapons were set into the arms rather than the torsos to allow wider firing arcs and even the possibility of flipping the arms to fire into the rear. Those two arm-mounted weapons were a pair of long-range missile 20 racks, each fed by their own 3 tons of dedicated ammunition in the side torsos. While this definitely presented a significant threat, the Longbow was criticized for its lighter armor and lack of substantive secondary weaponry. 2 standard medium lasers split between the side torsos were nominal threats, and not even the addition of an emotional support small laser into the Longbow's head could stem the complaints that the mech was critically vulnerable if the mech was able to close within the LRM's minimum firing range. Those concerns were noted, but production was greenlit on the primitive 0C Longbow. It didn't take long for battlefield reports to come in cheering the mech for its success in the fire support role. Even with its flaws, the Longbow was able to put enough fire on target to shift the course of battles and the destiny of the Free Worlds League. The house finally had its own homegrown design that was a battlefield game-changer. The Longbow was so successful that when the primitive technologies were made obsolete at the dawn of the 26th century, it was on the shortlist to receive a significant variant upgrade. They had lost Chow early on to a missile barrage from a Longbow which now prowled the saddles above, appearing occasionally to rain down death on them. Felix died later, finding himself toe-to-toe with an Anubis just when his autocannons jammed. He glanced up for a better look at his attacker and saw the Longbow standing close to the top of the wide apron of slide material. The heavily armored unit would chew them to pieces before they could wear it down with conventional attacks. Trial by Chaos, page 319-320, by J. Stephen York. The success of machines like the Longbow was the catalyst for significant growth of what could be described as the military-industrial complex across not just the Terran hegemony, but the Great Houses as well. Massive amounts of money could be made by companies who were well-placed and able to provide the technology that military leaders and their political allies demanded. Though all of this was not without its own perils, as smaller companies were gobbled up by larger ones in leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers, and sometimes, if a little less flashy, a friendly handshake. Lockenberg-Hawley Industries was itself merged into what would end up being the massive Starcore Industries that so many across the Inner Sphere would know, love, and accept paychecks from. For those outside the Free Worlds League who coveted the Longbow, this was good news, as now the BattleMech could be obtained without having to take it from a fallen Free Worlds League Mechwarrior. The Starcore LGB-0W Longbow, produced for widespread sales across the Inner Sphere and even into the periphery, was a notably different beast than its primitive first runs. The first 0Ws marched off the assembly lines in 2529 and would eventually be produced across 3 separate locations on Crofton, Lohberg, and Emrys 4. I did mention that the Longbow was popular, right? Everybody wanted one, or a lance, or a company of these things. Constructed from a Starcore 100 LGB standard frame wrapped around a Strand 340 fusion engine, the LGB-0W could hit a top speed of 64 km per hour, which was a good step up from the original 350 movement profile. 13 single heat sinks worked their hearts out, and 9 tons of standard Star Slab 9.5 Mark II armor provided the same 144 points of protection that the primitive Longbow had. When it came to armament, Starcore went with the 2 Hawley LRM-20 missile racks, once again set into the arms. However, each rack was only fed by 2 tons of ammunition instead of 3. This step down in that department was notable and mostly forgivable. To address the complaints about the Longbow being vulnerable to threats that close within the minimum range of the LRMs, the design team reflected, met in committee, then decided to toss all the complaints into the bin because they pulled the 2 medium lasers from the side torsos and replaced them with a pair of LRM-5s, along with 2 tons of ammunition stored in the center torso. Why the center torso? Because we get what we deserve. Finally, thankfully, the emotional support small laser was left in the head critical location and was the mech's last hope should an enemy draw near. We're going to put a pin in this small laser discussion because it's going to end up relevant in a little bit. Oh, don't you worry. While the 0W Longbow was faster than its predecessor, the loss of the medium lasers and the extra ammunition hobbled it. Alas, I am just the messenger here, so if you have complaints, I'll file them with Jenny in HR. Just 2 years later, in 2531, the design team was looking at that head-mounted small laser, and someone must have said, "You know how a mech can barely defend itself? Let's add a little bit of armor by getting rid of a small laser and a ton of that LRM-5 ammunition." Apparently, no one else in the room had the huevos to stare that person down, so we got the LGB-0W2. Left with just the 2 LRM-20s and 2 LRM-5s, the 0W2 carried an additional 1.5 tons of armor, bringing the total to 10.5 or 168 points. While this did modestly improve the Longbow's staying power when taking fire, it left the BattleMech entirely dependent upon others for close-range defense without even a small laser with which to defend itself. Unless, of course, you're counting on a lucky kick to that light mech that's circling you like a velociraptor at a kid's birthday party. A longbow and an archer belonging to Hans's security company moved to the edge of the bridge, LRM launcher covers snapping open as they moved to protect their liege. A slam of metal on metal, the resounding clang of an autocannon crashing into a battlemaster's rear armor. "Wake up, Hans!" "Arden!" Franz swung the medium laser on his right hand of his Atlas into line with Arden's Victor, aiming just below the cockpit. "Damn it, Ran, we've got to move. Whether he walks or we drag him. We can't stay here." "Lower your arm, Arden." The LRMs from the heavy mechs defending Hans launched toward the Kuritans, smoke blasting from vents and billowing backwards toward the Battlemaster. Irreplaceable, Battlecore Anthology, Volume 6, page 276, by Jason Hansa. As the years passed, there were attempts to tweak the longbow as it became a staple of battlemech warfare across the Inner Sphere. It could be found in the units of every major house and even among the forces of the periphery states, though the higher concentration of the longbows were fielded by the Free Worlds League and the Federated Commonwealth due to the proximity of those production centers. In 2610, a new variant of the machine was produced which sought to shift the balance for the longbow with the return of energy weapons, heat sinks, and increased armor. This all came at the cost of a smaller 255 fusion engine which dropped the movement profile to 350. But let's focus on the good stuff. The loadout was not a surprise with its twin LRM-20s, the 2 side torso LRM-5s, and the 2 medium lasers made their return, which had to be comforting. The 7Q's 14.5 tons of armor bulked up the machine's protection by roughly 38% over the 0W variant, which had to be nice for those longbow mech warriors who found themselves a little too close to the action. The final major change for the variant was the inclusion of 22 single heat sinks, which feels like a lot considering an alpha strike including medium lasers while on the run left the mech at +2 heat. With the medium lasers being a backup weapon most of the time, I can't be the only one to think a couple of those heat sinks could have been shaved off in exchange for more LRM-20 ammunition. Going from 12 shots to 18 would be a game changer for this fire support battlemech. Oh well, perhaps we'll see something creative as we shuffle down the timeline. Just 5 years later, in 2615, the LGB-8C was introduced, which was very close to the 7Q, matching its speed, armor, and weapons loadout, except for the 2 rear-facing medium lasers, which were paid for with the removal of 2 heat sinks. While normally I might be a little critical of this sort of thing, it's mentioned in the fluff that the longbows had a tendency and capability of turning to run from a fight, flipping the LRM-20 racks behind to fire as they retreat. In this case, it would make some sense that those medium lasers could be added to the mix should an enemy tread too close. While the designers didn't leap at my additional ammunition idea, at least the 8C shows some creativity. After that, there would be a long wait for a new longbow variant. In that time, the battlemech earned its place among the pantheon of quality producers, ruining more than one day with seemingly endless streams of long-range missiles. During the Third Succession War, when the Capellans were desperate to hit back at the Fed Suns on Kittery, a pair of longbows earned their keep. Facing tough Fed Sun opposition, including Centurions and Victors, it appeared that the Capellans were going to take the field when a scouting lance was able to break through the lines and harass the Davion fire support units. Only 2 longbows were able to survive the encounter as they were able to fall back and still fire, eventually helping to drive back the Capellans. References in the historical records are shockingly spotty up through the clan invasion, as fire support is often a thankless job outside of those who directly benefit from it. While there is no official sourcebook recognition of the longbow showing up on Tukiad, one story in the Tukiad short story compilation does mention a ghost bear tangoing with a Comguard longbow on the outskirts of Luck on the 3rd of May. The story, Burdens of Honor, makes its mention as part of the Comguard's baiting tactics, intended to lure the clanners into pushing forward into waiting kill boxes. These sort of shenanigans were terribly frustrating for the clanners who preferred their ritualistic 1v1 fights. Surprisingly, the longbow didn't receive its first Helm memory core upgrade until 3056 with the LGB-7V. Starcore really pulled out all the stops for the 7V with seemingly no expense spared to create a premium product. Starting with the extra light fusion engine, which maintained the slow but steady 350 movement, but bought 6.5 tons of mass for use with other bells and whistles. The 7V benefited from the installation of 14 double heatsinks as well as 16 tons of standard plate armor, providing 256 points of protection. This longbowman was not going to go down easy. For the first time, the customary LRM-20 racks in the arms saw an upgrade in the form of Artemis IV fire control systems. If it's been a while for you, these additions for the missile launchers boost the number of missiles which will track and hit the target, +2 on the cluster hits table for those playing the tabletop game. Each LRM-20 was fed this time by 3 tons of ammunition that also benefited from case to save the life of the Mechwarrior should things go sideways. In addition to the LRM launchers, someone had the bright idea to slap an ER large laser into the mech. It is after all a Helm memory core upgrade, right? Settling it into the center torso. This significantly improved the longbow's long-range firepower and made sure those 14 double heatsinks were earning their keep. In order to deal with those close-range threats, the design team at Starcore settled the issue with the installation of 5 medium pulse lasers split between the side torsos and the 1 open head critical location. This made closing on the longbow a dangerous proposition for light and even medium battle mechs, as well as infantry, which flash fry in about 0.03 seconds when you hit them with a medium pulse laser. While some may quibble about the mech's speed and the vulnerability of that XL engine, the Longbow 7V makes a pretty good argument that the costs are justified through the improved long-range damage, increased ammunition supply, and the ability to render close targets into smoldering slag. I think the 7V is a strong contender for the longbow in its perfected form. Though if you disagree, there are plenty of more official variants coming down the timeline. The missile and laser barrages that had so devastated the Cauldronborn now pounded the last 2 Stormcrow to the north. The Rakshasas took down the Stormcrow Victor had hit previously, while the longbows combined to attack the previously untouched Smoke Jaguar. At the closer-in range, their fire became far more accurate, wreathing the Stormcrow with strings of explosions. The clan mech careened around as each wave pummeled it and the lasers skewered it, and it finally crashed to the ground and lay there, a smoking ruin. Prince of Havoc, page 95, by Michael A. Stackpole. If the 7V was a bit too much for you, in 3061 the Longbow 10C was introduced, which was a half step back with the technology. The 10C returned to a standard engine, and while it had 14 double heatsinks, the designers were forced to drop down to 14.5 tons of standard plate armor. The loadout is familiar with the traditional LRM-20s and 2 LRM-5s, though this time all 4 launchers benefited from Artemis IV fire control systems. Each LRM-5 launcher fed from its own dedicated ton of ammunition, and the LRM-20s each got 2 tons or 12 shots apiece. All the ammunition was protected by case in each side torso. At mid and short range, 4 ER medium lasers were set into the side torsos, 2 facing the front and 2 facing the rear firing arc. As with previous and subsequent variants, the rear-facing weaponry is more justified than with other battle mechs. Though the 10C is a solid mech with significant staying power without that XL engine, the ammunition is a concern, and its Mechwarrior would do well to always have an escape route. The Longbow 10C is a great machine for those who pathologically hate XL engines but still want the other Helm memory core upgrades. After a short hop to 3061, our next official crack at creating the ideal longbow was once again carried out by Starcore Industries and their design team. The LGB-12C was intended to address the concerns and quote-unquote gripes about previous generations of the Longbow, and they spared very little, including the overall look of the battlemech. This is our Project Phoenix variant for those of you in the know. By this point, other fire support battlemechs had crowded the field, and StarCorps was willing to think outside the box to stay relevant. The challenge was made all the more daunting due to the disappointing performance of the 7V, which did so poorly in the post-clan invasion universe that those that did manage to survive battles tended to be sold off to mercenaries or periphery states. Mechs like the Naginata and Salamander saw swift sales as replacements. It's difficult to deny the awesome drawing power of the Salamander, I know. Yet the StarCorps team did their best, and the 12C was the result. Let's see how it looks. Crafted from a standard structure around a Strand Martin 255 extra light fusion engine, the 12C had its own distinctive look, especially with its new 12.5 tons of armor. With 12 double heat sinks, we haven't gone anywhere too exciting so far. However, the new Martin Quarry Tarsus XLR 2.2 targeting and tracking system, installed along with Artemis 4 fire control systems for each LRM launcher, gave the Longbow 12C an unparalleled ability to track not just ground targets but also air assets. In fact, in testing, mech warriors crowed about successfully targeting units outside typical combat ranges. While this system did end up being a strong portion of the sales pitch, the actual mech warriors themselves tended not to advertise it far and wide. It was believed that those enemies who try to go toe-to-toe with a longbow discover their disadvantage only as the first waves of LRMs come raining down. In addition to the traditional LRM-20s in the arms, the design teams added 2 LRM-15 racks alongside them. This boosted the overall total LRM shot to 70 missiles per volley. All 4 launchers were boosted through Artemis 4 fire control systems. The LRM-20s could feed from 3 tons of ammunition apiece, and the LRM-15s each got their own 2 tons of reloads. All the ammunition was stored in the mech's side torsos, which were protected by case. The only close-range weaponry added were 3 ER small lasers split between the head and center torso. No matter how you feel about the Project Phoenix aesthetics, the Longbow 12C is a monster. While it was more vulnerable than some of the previous variants, the ability to rain down up to 70 LRMs onto a target was enough to give any battlefield commander pause. As it turned out, the LGB-12C was a big success with the Great Houses, which each tried to get as many as possible into their units. It turned out to be fortuitous timing, as the Fedcom Civil War would make use of many of these longbows in the knockdown, drag-out fight. There was even a report that an AFFS marshal who amassed an entire reinforced battalion of the longbows just to rain down death and destruction on the 15th Diaron regulars on Addix. I, presenter beareth of the opacious Venatori, will this day make Apollyon and the master proud, and establish my place as supreme amon. The Menai Domini would not finish his sentence as Arrow 4 artillery missiles began raining down on the bleakest mechs. The barrage was pinpoint, Jessie was relieved to see. Her target acquisition gear laser had guided the missiles perfectly from kilometers away as they were launched in waves from the longbow Jessie had left behind, just outside their dropship. The barrage lasted for less than a minute, until the longbow's magazines went dry. Ordnance was getting tougher to come by, but Jessie had authorized expending the last of the Ghost's artillery missiles without hesitation. Lost Ghosts, page 114, Shrapnel number 9, by David G. Martin. Now, if you're one of those jaded or hard-to-please folks who haven't yet been impressed so far, perhaps you'll enjoy the next few variants of our noble longbow because they are unconventional. The first in the timeline is the LGB-0H, and it comes to us thanks to the creative minds in the Magistracy of Canopus. Clearly they had a connection who had a bunch of rocket launchers that fell off the back of a truck, because, oh boy, when you see it, the structure of the mech doesn't offer any surprises, except for the notable return to the larger 340 fusion engine, which pushed the mech's movement profile back up to 460. The 14.5 tons of standard plate, 11 double heat sinks, and the usual sensor package round out the nuts and bolts. Where things really go off the rails is with the weapons loadout. Someone decided that it would be a good idea to create a longbow that carried 2 particle projection cannons split between the side torsos, aided by 26 rocket launcher 10s that filled up the arms and spilled into the side torsos. While theoretically one could fire all of them at once at a target and hope for the best when you eventually come out of shutdown, that would be quite the gamble. Yet again, the prospect of doing 260 damage to a target plus either or both of the PPCs hitting may be a temptation too good to resist. They say luck favors the bold, so this is an all or nothing act that may be worth the 1800 point battle value. In 3068, the LGB-8V kerfuffle-era longbow went another direction after its designers removed the LRM racks from the 7V chassis and replaced them with two Arrow 4 missile launchers split between the arms and side torsos. This vastly increased the range and offensive power of the longbow, but left open the option of standard long-range combat by leaving the ER large laser in the center torso. It even got to keep a couple of the medium pulse lasers in the side torsos facing forward this time. The 8V carried 8 tons of ammunition for the Arrow 4 launchers, which adds up to 20 shots per launcher. 2 tons of the ammunition were stored in each leg, and 2 more in each torso protected by case. You really don't want to be in a battle mech carrying a bunch of Arrow 4 ammo without case. That'll ruin your entire day, and likely the days of everyone else around you in a substantial radius. The Longbow 8V is an entirely functional, if very expensive, artillery battle mech that isn't as vulnerable as Arrow 4 wielding tanks with their limited mobility and other tanky shortcomings. It may be a good option for people who want to give the Arrow 4 a try. If neither of these newer designs catches your fancy, perhaps the LGB-13 NAIS Longbow can. I doubt it, but, well, who knows. There's always someone out there who likes something no matter how bizarre it is. Some people even subscribe and like my videos, which you should definitely do. Anyway, the 13 NAIS was a limited run special order for the Fed Sons in 3069, which once again sacrificed the traditional LRM launchers and went in a very different direction. Built with endosteel around a standard 255 fusion engine, the 13 NAIS benefited from 10 double heatsinks and 16.5 tons of standard plate armor. Go ahead and just max out that armor, why don't you? No big surprises so far. For primary weapons, which may be a generous description, there are 6 light AC-5 autocannons split between the arms, fed by 7 tons of ammunition split between the case-protected side torsos. For those who need the refresher, the light ACs weigh less, do the same damage as their older versions, but sacrifice range. As a result, the light AC-5s on the longbow can only hit out to 15 hexes. What you do with that information, or any judgments you make about the value of the light ACs, is up to you. 2 ER medium lasers were installed into the legs of the mech to bolster the mid and short range damage, and the emotional support small laser makes the return to the mech in the ER form and placed into the left torso. 2 B-pods were installed into the legs, which could be triggered to render infantry and battle armor into meat confetti, and finally a Guardian ECM and C3 slave computer were installed into the mech, making this our first Operation Sneaky Sneak longbow in the historical record. While I think I understand the goal here of turning the mech into a mid and short range electronic warfare brawler, I'm a little confused as to why it had to be on a longbow. It's a strange platform for such shenanigans. In 3070, we get things back to a sense of normalcy with the LGB-13C, which takes advantage of some new technology. The 13C once again has a standard structure, the bigger XL engine, 12 double heatsinks, and carries 12.5 tons of standard plate armor. The 460 movement speed is nice, though you can see the consequences in a less powerful loadout and less armor. The 13C's primary punch came from the installation of 6 multi-missile 7 racks scattered across the mech's arms and side torsos. The MMLs were aided by Artemis IV fire control systems and were fed by 6 tons of ammunition stored in case-protected side torsos. Depending on the loadout, each ton of the MML ammunition could provide 17 shots of LRM and 14 shots with the SRMs. To aid the MML-7s in short range, 3 ER small lasers were installed into the mech's center torso and head open critical locations. While the 13C's long-range offensive power is pretty limited in comparison to earlier variants, the flexibility of the MMLs make for a powerful short-range punch if necessary. If my public school math skills have held out, firing all 6 MML-7s is up to 42 SRMs hitting a target for a potential 84 damage. With the 12 double heat sinks, the 13C can do this up to 3 turns in a row while on the run before suffering any cumulative heat penalties. This is not a longbow you want to wrangle with up close unless you are very well insured. Apparently sales of the 13C were swift everywhere except for the Lyran Commonwealth, where its importation was blocked in order to promote the sales of the domestically produced 14C, which is a similar variant that carried MML-9s and ER medium lasers instead of MML-7s, but paid for them with a downgraded XL engine. In 3082, Starcore would return to the Longbow's roots with the LGB-12R, which took advantage of the Lyran-designed light fusion engine to shave off 3 tons of mass. It carried 11 double heat sinks, 13.5 tons of standard armor, and for the first time officially 3 jump jets, pushing the mech's movement profile to 353. Oh, I do like me a jumpy mech. Instead of going with the classic LRM-20s, the 12R was equipped with 4 Holly Ballista LRM-15 racks split between the arms and side torsos. They were fed by 8 tons of ammunition stored in the case-protected side torsos. This provided each launcher with 16 shots before the mech would need to consider hoofing it back to the supply lines. Thankfully, an ER large laser was set into the left torso along with an ER medium laser in the head that could keep the Longbow in the fight if necessary or potentially ward off close-range attackers. The 11 double heat sinks are enough to keep the mech running and gunning, but it's an either-or with the ER large laser when it comes into play. As always, the 12 heat on the ER large laser tends to dominate the heat scale. Overall, the 12R is a strong build, and though the first production runs were contracted to go to the Republic of the Sphere and then the DCMS, the variant would see open market sales eventually. The 12Rs produced at the Crofton lines ended up in the AFFS units posted along the border worlds with the Capellans and the Periphery Marches. As usual, everyone wanted as many longbows as they could get. I personally like the 12R for trying something new while not straying too far from what makes the longbow the longbow. Taking a leap down the timeline to 3101, our next longbow is the LGB-14Q, which became the flagship model of the Starcore Sonoa production lines. The 14Q had a standard structure wrapped around a larger XL engine facilitating 460 movement. 12 double heat sinks were installed and 16 tons of standard plate armor surprised no one. The weapons loadout was a nod to the Star League era design with twin LRM-20s in the arms and 4 ER medium lasers scattered across the side torsos, 2 facing the front and 2 facing that rear firing arc. The fancier bits include 2 MML-5 launchers set into the side torsos fed by 2 tons of their ammunition. The LRM-20s each have 2 tons worth of shots, and all the missile ammunition was protected by side torso case 2s. Those are always a valued quality of life addition whenever stacking multiple tons of ammunition next to an XL engine. In most areas, the Longbow 14Q excels over its predecessors. The only lingering issue was the lack of a 3rd ton of LRM-20 ammunition for each launcher, which would have been really nice to see. A maniac might even suggest sacrificing those 2 rear-mounted ER medium lasers to make room for that field upgrade. But we go to war with what we have, not with what we want. The next official variant arrived in 3105 and was designated the 14V. A close cousin to the 14Q, this longbow embraced a more non-traditional loadout on the same frame, though with 2 additional double heat sinks instead of LRMs. The 14V relied upon a pair of medium-range Missile 20 launchers aided by an Apollo fire control system. For those of you who need the reminder, the Apollo removes the +1 to hit penalty for MRMs, but subtracts 1 from the roll from the cluster hits table, so the MRMs fired are more likely to hit, but you're less likely to hit with all of them. Each launcher has 2 tons of ammunition in the case 2 protected side torsos. 2 LRM-5s split between the side torsos provide the longest reach, but they are quickly backed up by a pair of light particle projection cannons that could dish out their reliable 5 damage out to 18 hexes. Finally, 2 ER medium lasers were added to the side torsos facing that rear firing arc. While I appreciate that there is an official medium-range missile variant, the Longbow 14V's weapons build is a little bit of everything, amounting to very little. The MRMs hit medium range at 8 hexes, and the LRMs hit their minimum range at 6. So the light PPCs have their minimums at 3, and all of this leaves a tight margin for the 14V to be dangerous. If I were to try and fix it to my liking, I'd yank those LRM-5s and replace them with a couple of SRM-4s and a ton of standard ammunition. Oh, and maybe a 2nd ton of Inferno rounds. Since the MRMs operate best close up, you may as well lean into it and get within snuggling range with your firepower. Our most recent official variant arrived in 3140 and was designated the LGB-10K. It is, well, definitely an interesting interpretation of what a longbow can be. Built from a standard frame around a smaller XL engine, the 10K was given 14 double heatsinks and was protected by 16 tons of armor in a very standard configuration, including the arm missile bay doors that would normally cover missile racks. However, instead of LRMs, the Longbow 10K was equipped with dual Ultra AC-20s. Apparently, this variant was first spotted on the outer edges of Lyran territory near the periphery, where it was being used to bait overeager enemies into thinking the 10K was just another fire support longbow that had been caught out of position. After closing in, their assumption would be rewarded with blasts from the UAC-20s, typically causing catastrophic damage. It also carried an ER large laser in the center torso as to not be completely defenseless at long range, and an emotional support medium pulse laser in the head offered its accurate rapid de-escalation capability. The Longbow 10K is an interesting niche build that could be a nasty surprise, but it doesn't really feel like a longbow. I get why it exists, and it's a pretty silly little bit of lore behind it, but I prefer my longbows packed with long-range weaponry. Or else, why call it a longbow? Alas, finally, we near the end of our journey with the longbow. However, my unmanaged hubris and totally out-of-control ego dictates that I take a crack at creating an MF configuration for the noble longbow. To justify its existence, we're going to say that it's a Wolf Empire refit using the Longbow 12Rs captured following the fight on Terra. The Longbow 12MF retains the standard structure but benefits from the replacement of the engine with a Clan XL grade 255 engine and a compact gyro to buy a few critical locations. It carries 12 inner sphere double heatsinks and is maxed out on the armor coverage with 16.5 tons of standard plate. The mech's movement profile is 354 thanks to the addition of 4 improved jump jets, which give the longbow unique mobility in comparison to any of its previous variants. Seeking to maximize the 12MF's potential to ruin someone's day, 4 advanced tactical missile 9 launchers were added to the mech, split between the left and right arms. They would feed voraciously from a grand total of 12 tons of ammunition, split between the side torsos, which are each protected by Clan Spec Case 2. With a good mix of the different ammunition types, this longbow is a danger at all ranges. Should things get really hairy, 3 Clan Spec small pulse lasers were also added, 2 split between the arms and the 3rd added to the head critical location. While not a min-maxed machine by any stretch of the imagination, the Longbow 12MF is a sort of inner sphere clan monstrosity that we're likely to see as we move further into the IlClan era. Some regions, powers, etc. are going to be able to integrate clan spec gear into their mechs depending upon proximity to capable production and friendly trade agreements with factions like the Sea Foxes. If you would like to try out the Longbow 12MF, I've included the record sheet for it in a Dropbox link in the video notes. If you end up dumping 36 high explosive rounds into some poor hapless battle mech, I want to hear about it. So why do we love the Longbow? Besides having a cool name, the ability to launch large numbers of missiles, and looking pretty badass, golly, where to begin? The Longbow's history spans almost the entirety of the existence of battle mechs in the universe, and it's so common that it's earned its ubiquitous quirk. The fact that the lore goes out of its way to point out that every great house and periphery nation not only used them but actively sought out to obtain more whenever possible says a lot about just how important fire support continues to be in the distant future. While not a flawless creation, the Longbow's issues were minor and often outweighed by its advantages, such as reversible arms, advanced anti-aircraft targeting, and a great set of LRM launchers. But I'm curious what you think. Is the Longbow a regular on your lists, or are you a fan of one of the other fire support options, like the Archer, or even medium options like the Trebuchet? Let me know in the comments and we'll keep the discussion going. Big thanks to the MechFrog Discord server community that always has such well-painted models to share for the upcoming week's topic. If you'd like to join and even share pictures of your own models, I'm going to add the server link to the video notes below. Come hang out with us for discussion, memes, and the occasional debate about why ice cream companies should make mint ice cream without any chocolate chips in it. If you thought the video was worthwhile, hitting that like or subscribe button lets YouTube's algorithm know that it's worth sharing with others, and you're much more likely to see my nonsense in the future. If you want to go one step further, supporting the channel through Ko-fi or becoming a YouTube member keeps the nonsense flowing. To all those who already have, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means a lot, and I'll keep working hard to bring new BattleTech content to you each week. With that, I'll say have a great week. Please go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.